The sound of restless horses woke Grace Jameson from sleep, their nervous whickering cutting through the stillness of the Wyoming night like a blade through silk. She pulled her thin shawl around her shoulders and stepped out of the makeshift shelter she had found behind the livery stable, her breath forming small clouds in the cold October air of 1884. The horses in the corral were circling, agitated by something she could not see, their hooves drumming an anxious rhythm against the packed earth. Without thinking, she began to hum the lullaby her mother had sung to her years ago, back when the world had been softer and full of promise. The melody floated across the night air, a gentle thing that seemed to wrap around the frightened animals like a warm blanket. Within moments, their movements began to slow, their breathing deepened, and the wild energy that had possessed them moments before began to dissipate into the darkness. Grace continued humming, her voice barely above a whisper, watching as one by one the horses settled, their heads lowering, their eyes half closing in contentment. She did not hear the footsteps approaching behind her until a deep voice spoke, making her jump. "They sleep better for you." Grace spun around to find a tall man standing several feet away, his hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that caught the moonlight. Even in the dim light, she could see the surprise on his face, mixed with something else she could not quite identify. He held his hand slightly away from his body, as if to show he meant no harm. "I am sorry," Grace stammered, suddenly aware of how this must look. A strange woman, trespassing on private property, interfering with someone else's horses in the dead of night. "I did not mean to intrude. They seemed upset and I just wanted to help." The man took a step closer and Grace instinctively moved back. He stopped immediately, his expression softening. "You are not intruding." "Well, not exactly. Those are my horses and they have been restless every night for the past week. Nothing I have tried has helped them settle. But you," he gestured toward the now peaceful animals, "you got them calm in less than a minute." Grace looked back at the horses, then at the man before her. "It is just something my mother taught me." Animals respond to gentle sounds, to kindness in a voice. Most people do not think about kindness when it comes to livestock. The man moved toward the fence, resting his arms on the top rail. "I am Griffin Jameson. I own this ranch, or what is left of it anyway." The surname hit Grace like a physical blow. "Jameson," she repeated, her voice barely audible. Griffin turned to look at her more carefully. "Yes. Why, do you know the name?" Grace felt her heart racing. This could not be coincidence. She had traveled hundreds of miles to reach Rock Springs, Wyoming, following the trail of scattered information about the family her father had spoken of in his final days. The Jamesons. Her father's brother and his descendants. The family connection she had hoped might offer her some refuge after she lost everything in Kansas. "My name is Winona Oaks," she said, using the name she had adopted after fleeing the disaster that had claimed her parents' farm and left her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. She could not tell him the truth, not yet, not until she knew what kind of man he was. "I only just arrived in Rock Springs today. I was looking for work, for a place to stay, and I found the livery stable open. The owner said I could rest here for the night." Griffin studied her face in the moonlight, and Grace felt exposed under his gaze. She knew what he must see. A young woman, barely 22, thin from traveling and rationing food, wearing a dress that had seen better days and carrying everything she owned in a small canvas bag. "The livery is my property too," Griffin said, but his voice held no accusation. "Old Henry who runs it has a soft heart. He probably did not want to turn you away." He paused, considering. "You said you are looking for work," Grace nodded, hope flaring in her chest. "Yes, I can cook, clean, mend clothing, tend to animals. I worked on a farm most of my life." "Can you read and write?" The question surprised her. "Yes. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She made sure I had an education." Griffin seemed to make a decision. "I have been looking for someone to help manage the household. My previous housekeeper left 3 months ago to care for her sick sister in Cheyenne. I have been managing on my own, but running a ranch and trying to keep a house in order is more than one person can handle well." He met her eyes directly. "The work is hard, but the pay is fair, and you would have your own room in the main house, meals included." Grace felt tears threatening to spill. After weeks of uncertainty, of sleeping in barns and begging for odd jobs, this offer felt like a miracle. "I would be grateful for the opportunity." "Can you start tomorrow?" "I can start now if you need me to." Griffin smiled, and the expression transformed his face from stern to almost boyish. "Tomorrow is soon enough. Let me show you to the house." He led her across the yard toward a large 2-story structure that looked solid and well-maintained, unlike many of the ramshackle buildings she had passed on her journey west. Inside, he lit a lantern and showed her through rooms that were clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. The furniture was good quality but worn, and there were no decorative touches, no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls. "This will be your room," Griffin said, opening a door on the ground floor to reveal a small but tidy space with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. "The kitchen is through there, and you are welcome to anything in the pantry. I usually wake before dawn, so breakfast around 5:30 would be good if that suits you." "That is perfectly fine," Grace assured him. Griffin hesitated in the doorway. "Miss Oakes, I should tell you that I live here alone. There is no other staff besides Henry at the livery, and he has his own cottage on the far side of the property. I do not want you to feel uncomfortable or worried about propriety." Grace appreciated his consideration, but after everything she had been through, propriety seemed like a luxury she could not afford. "I trust that you are a gentleman, Mr. Jameson, and I am grateful for the work and the shelter." "Griffin," he corrected. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, we should probably dispense with the formalities." "Then you should call me Winona," she said, the false name still feeling strange on her tongue. After Griffin left her alone, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to process everything that had happened. She had found the Jameson family, or at least part of it. Griffin might be her cousin, though she would need to learn more about his family history to be certain. Her father had spoken of his older brother Robert, who had moved west to make his fortune in cattle ranching. Could Griffin be Robert's son? But even as hope bloomed, caution tempered it. She had learned the hard way that not everyone could be trusted, that family connections did not always mean safety or welcome. She would keep her true identity hidden for now, would watch and learn and make sure that revealing herself would not bring more harm than good. Sleep came slowly that night, but when it did, Grace dreamed of horses settling in the darkness, of a deep voice saying they slept better for her, and of a future that might hold more than just survival. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the pale light of dawn filtering through her window. She dressed quickly in her only other dress, pinned her long brown hair into a practical bun, and made her way to the kitchen. Griffin was already there, stoking the fire in the large cast-iron stove. "Good morning," he said, straightening. "I was just getting the stove heated. I usually make coffee first thing." "Let me do that," Grace said, moving forward. "That is what you hired me for after all." She set about preparing breakfast, finding her way around the kitchen with an efficiency that came from years of practice. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, and a surprising array of preserved vegetables. Within half an hour, she had coffee brewing, biscuits in the oven, and eggs frying in a pan. Griffin sat at the rough-hewn table, watching her work with an expression of something like wonder. I forgot what it was like to have someone who knows their way around a kitchen. "How long have you been managing on your own?" Grace asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. 3 months, like I said. Mrs. Henderson was with me for 2 years before that. She was a good woman, but her sister needed her more than I did. He took a sip of the coffee and closed his eyes briefly. "This is excellent." "It is just coffee," Grace said, but she felt pleased by the compliment. "You have not tasted my coffee," Griffin replied with a hint of humor. "I am pretty sure I have been slowly poisoning myself." They ate breakfast together as the sun rose fully, painting the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and amber. Through the window, Grace could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. It was beautiful country, harsh and unforgiving but magnificent in its vastness. "Tell me about the ranch," Grace said, wanting to learn more about this place and the man who owned it. Griffin pushed his empty plate aside. "My father started it 20 years ago. He came out here with nothing but determination and a dream of building something lasting. He bought the land when it was cheap, built the house with his own hands, and spent years building up the herd. When he died 5 years ago, he left it all to me." "I am sorry for your loss," Grace said softly. "Thank you. He was a good man, stubborn as an old mule, but good." Griffin's expression grew distant with memory. "He always said that land was the only thing worth having because they were not making any more of it. He wanted to build a legacy, something that would last beyond his own lifetime. And you share that dream." "I do. Though it is harder than he made it look. Cattle prices have been falling, and there are larger operations moving in that can undercut the smaller ranchers. I have been trying to diversify, raising horses as well as cattle, improving the breeding stock. Those horses you calmed last night, they are valuable animals, temperamental but fast and strong. If I can get them settled and trained properly, they will bring good money." Grace saw an opening. "What has been making them restless? I am not sure. At first, I thought maybe a mountain lion was hunting nearby, but I have not found any tracks or signs. It is almost like they can sense something I cannot. Animals are strange that way. They know things we do not." "My father used to say the same thing," Grace said without thinking. "What happened to your father, if you do not mind me asking?" Grace chose her words carefully. "He died last spring. There was a fire. He and my mother both." It was not entirely a lie. Her parents were dead, though the circumstances had been more complicated than a simple fire. "I am sorry," Griffin said, and the sympathy in his voice was genuine. "It is hard being alone in the world." "Yes," Grace agreed quietly. "It is." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Griffin stood. "I should get to work. There is always something that needs doing on a ranch. You can spend today getting familiar with the house, seeing what needs to be done. There is a list in the study of things I have been meaning to get to but have not had time for. Feel free to prioritize however you think best." After Griffin left, Grace spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly. It was larger than she had realized, with 4 bedrooms upstairs and several rooms downstairs, including a study, a parlor, and a formal dining room that looked like it had not been used in years. The place had good bones, as her mother would have said, but it needed a woman's touch. She found the list Griffin had mentioned in the study, and it was extensive. Windows that needed cleaning, curtains that needed mending, floors that needed a thorough scrubbing, a garden that had been neglected, shelves that needed organizing. She decided to start with the basics, focusing on the rooms that were used most frequently. The kitchen, Griffin's bedroom, and the parlor, By the time evening came, she had made significant progress. The kitchen gleamed. The parlor looked welcoming with the furniture properly arranged and the surfaces dusted, and she had started on the mending pile she found in a basket near the fireplace. When Griffin came in for supper, he stopped in the doorway of the parlor and stared. "I forgot this room could look like this," he said. Grace had prepared a hearty stew with fresh bread, using some of the dried beef and vegetables from the pantry. They ate together again, falling into an easy conversation about the day's work. Griffin told her about the fence line he had been repairing, about the new calf that had been born that morning, about the weather patterns he was watching with concern. "Winter comes early here," he said, "and when it comes, it hits hard. We need to make sure we have enough supplies laid in, enough hay for the animals, everything buttoned down tight." "How can I help with the preparations?" Grace asked. "There will be plenty to do. We need to preserve more food, make sure the root cellar is properly stocked, get the winter clothes and blankets out and check them for damage." Mrs. Henderson usually handled most of that, and I realized after she left how much I had relied on her knowledge. Over the following days, Grace threw herself into the work with a determination born of gratitude and genuine interest. She found that she enjoyed the rhythm of ranch life, the way each day had its own pattern and purpose. She learned the layout of the property, memorized where things were kept, and began implementing small improvements that made the household run more smoothly. And every evening, she found herself drawn to the corral where Griffin's horses were kept. They remained skittish and restless during the day, but when she came at night and hummed to them, they settled almost immediately. She began to recognize them as individuals. The tall bay mare with the white star on her forehead, the spirited black gelding who was always the last to calm, the gentle gray who seemed to find her presence particularly soothing. She did not realize Griffin had been watching until the fourth night, when his voice came from behind her again. "They really do sleep better for you." Grace turned to find him leaning against the fence, his expression thoughtful. "I've been coming out to check on them after supper, and every night they are peaceful. Then during the day they are right back to being agitated. You have some kind of gift." "It is not a gift," Grace protested. "It is just patience and a gentle voice." "Then you have a gift for patience and gentleness," Griffin said, moving to stand beside her at the fence. "Not everyone does. Most ranch hands I have known treat horses like they are tools, things to be used and controlled. But you treat them like they have feelings, like their peace matters." "Because it does," Grace said simply. "Everything that lives has feelings. Just because animals cannot speak our language does not mean they do not communicate, do not feel fear or contentment or affection." Griffin was quiet for a moment, watching the horses sleep. "My father would have liked you. He used to say similar things. He believed in treating animals with respect, in understanding that we were all part of the same world. He sounds like he was a wise man. He was, though I did not always appreciate it when I was younger. I wanted excitement, adventure. I thought ranch life was boring and restrictive. I even left for a while, went to Denver thinking I would find something more interesting." Griffin smiled ruefully. "I learned pretty quickly that what I had here was worth more than anything I could find in a city. I came back, and my father never said 'I told you so,' though he would have been justified. He just welcomed me home and put me to work." Grace found herself wanting to know more about this man who had given her shelter and work, who spoke of his father with love and respect, who noticed when his horses slept peacefully. "How old were you when you came back?" 21. That was 6 years ago now. My father died 3 years after that, and suddenly everything was mine. The land, the livestock, the debts, the dreams, all of it. That must have been overwhelming." "It was, but also clarifying. I knew exactly what I had to do, what my purpose was. Not everyone gets that kind of clarity. He turned to look at her. What about you, Winona? What brought you all the way to Wyoming? Grace had been preparing for this question, but it still made her nervous. After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Kansas. The farm had debts and everything was sold to pay them. I had heard that there were opportunities out west, that a person could start fresh. So I came. That took courage. A woman traveling alone, coming to a strange place with no guarantees. It took desperation more than courage, Grace admitted. Though I suppose sometimes those two things look similar. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the horses breathe in their sleep. The moon was waxing toward full, casting silver light across the landscape, and the air held the sharp clarity that comes with elevation and approaching winter. "I am glad you came," Griffin said quietly. "I know it has only been a few days, but already the place feels more like a home than it has in months. You have made a difference here." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I am glad to be here. Thank you for giving me a chance." As the days turned into weeks, Grace settled more fully into her role at the ranch. She proved herself invaluable in countless ways. Managing the household supplies, preparing meals that were both delicious and economical, mending and maintaining clothing and linens, even helping with some of the outdoor work when needed. Griffin found himself looking forward to coming inside each evening, knowing the house would be warm and welcoming, knowing Winona would be there with her quiet competence and gentle manner. He also found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The way she hummed while she worked, the same melodies she used to calm the horses. The way her face lit up when she smiled, which was happening more frequently as she grew more comfortable. It was dangerous territory, he knew. She was his employee, dependent on him for wages and shelter. Any advance on his part would be inappropriate, would put her in an impossible position. So he kept his growing feelings to himself, tried to maintain a proper distance even as he found that distance increasingly difficult to bear. Grace was fighting her own battle with growing attraction. She had not expected to feel this way about Griffin Jameson. She had come to Rock Springs looking for family, for safety, for a chance to rebuild her life. She had not been looking for love, but there it was nonetheless, growing stronger each day. She noticed everything about him. The way his shoulders moved when he worked. The calluses on his hands from years of hard labor. The rare but beautiful smile that transformed his usually serious face. The kindness he showed to his animals and the few ranch hands who worked for him. The quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. But she could not act on these feelings. Not while she was lying to him about her identity. Not while the truth of who she was remained hidden between them. She needed to tell him, needed to reveal that she was Grace Jameson, not Winona Oakes, that she had come here specifically to find his family. But fear held her back. What if he felt betrayed by the deception? What if he sent her away? The tension between them grew palpable as October faded into November. They found excuses to be near each other, their conversations growing longer and more personal. Griffin began teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses, his hand steadying her as she learned to sit the saddle, his voice encouraging when she grew frustrated with her initial clumsiness. Grace showed him how she calmed the horses, teaching him the songs and the techniques her mother had taught her, delighted when he proved an apt student. One evening in mid-November, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing the first serious snow of the season. The wind howled around the house, rattling the windows and finding every crack and crevice. Grace made sure the fires were built up high, prepared a hot stew for dinner, and laid out extra blankets in case the temperature dropped too severely overnight. Griffin came in shaking snow from his coat, his face ruddy with cold. "That is going to be a bad one. I checked on all the animals, made sure everything was secured. We should be fine, but it will be a rough night." They ate dinner together, and neither of them suggested that Grace should retire to her room afterward. Instead, they moved to the parlor, where the fire burned warmly, and talked as the storm raged outside. Griffin told stories of previous winters, of blizzards that had lasted for days, of times when the ranch had been completely isolated from town. Grace spoke more freely than she had before about her childhood, about her parents and their farm, careful to keep the details vague enough that she did not contradict her assumed identity. At some point, Grace realized she had been unconsciously humming the same lullaby melody she used for the horses. Griffin was watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. I just like listening to you." "That song, it is peaceful. My mother used to sing it. I do not remember where she learned it, but it was always my favorite." Grace hesitated, then added, "She said it was passed down through her family, something her own mother had taught her." "Family traditions are important," Griffin said. "They connect us to people we have never met, remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves." Grace felt the weight of her deception pressing on her chest. This was her opening, her chance to tell him the truth. But before she could gather her courage, a tremendous crash came from somewhere outside, loud enough to be heard over the howling wind. Griffin was on his feet immediately. "That came from the barn. Something must have broken loose." "You cannot go out in this," Grace protested. "The visibility is terrible. I have to check. If the barn has been damaged, the animals could be in danger." He was already pulling on his heavy coat, wrapping a scarf around his face. Grace grabbed her own shawl. "Then I am coming with you." "Winona, no. It is too dangerous." "You might need help. I am coming." They argued briefly, but Griffin could see she would not be dissuaded. Together they pushed out into the storm, the wind immediately trying to tear them apart. Griffin grabbed Grace's hand, and they fought their way across the yard toward the barn, the snow so thick they could barely see a few feet ahead. Inside the barn, they found the source of the crash. Part of the roof had given way under the weight of the snow, and several of the horses had panicked. They were rearing and kicking in their stalls, eyes rolling white with terror. Griffin immediately moved to assess the damage while Grace went to calm the horses. She began humming, her voice barely audible over the storm and the frightened animals. But gradually, miraculously, the horses began to settle. She moved from stall to stall, touching each horse gently, continuing her soft melody, and one by one they calmed under her care. Griffin worked quickly to clear the worst of the debris and secure a tarp over the damaged section of roof. It was not a permanent solution, but it would keep the snow and wind out until proper repairs could be made. By the time he finished, all the horses were quiet, and Grace was standing in the center of the barn, covered in snow and hay, looking like some kind of pioneer angel. "You are amazing," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "Truly amazing." Grace met his eyes, and something shifted in the air between them. Griffin crossed the distance that separated them, and suddenly they were standing close, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Winona," he said softly, and then seemed at a loss for words. "Grace," she whispered. "What?" She took a shaky breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. "My name is not Winona Oakes. It is Grace Jameson." Griffin stepped back, confusion and hurt warring on his face. "What are you talking about?" The words spilled out in a rush. Your father, Robert, was my father's brother. That makes us cousins. I came to Rock Springs looking for family, hoping that maybe there would be someone here who could help me, who would care that we are connected by blood. But I was scared, and I did not know what kind of person you were, so I gave you a false name. I am sorry. I have wanted to tell you for weeks now, but I did not know how, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. Griffin was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Grace felt tears beginning to fall, hot against her cold cheeks. Please say something, she begged. Robert was my father's name, Griffin said slowly. You are telling me that your father was his brother, that we are family. Yes, my father spoke of him, of how Robert came west to find opportunity. I had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. I thought if I could just find you, find the family my father told me about, maybe I would not be so alone anymore. So everything you have told me has been a lie, not everything. My parents really are dead. I really did lose the farm. I really was desperate when I arrived here. The only thing I lied about was my name. Grace's voice broke. I am so sorry, Griffin. I know I should have told you from the beginning, but I was frightened and alone, and by the time I realized you were a good man, a kind man, I was terrified of losing what I had found here. Griffin turned away, his hand running through his hair in agitation. The silence stretched out, punctuated only by the sound of the storm and the quiet breathing of the horses. Your father's name was Thomas, he finally asked. Yes. My father told me about his younger brother Thomas. Said he stayed back east, married a woman he loved, tried to make a life farming. They lost touch over the years, only exchanged a few letters. Griffin turned back to face her. He always regretted that they had not stayed closer, that distance and time had separated them. My father felt the same way. In his last days, he talked about Robert, about the brother he had lost to time and distance. That is how I knew to come here, how I knew to look for the Jameson family in Wyoming. Griffin stepped closer again, and this time his expression was softer. You should have trusted me with the truth. I know, and I am sorry. If you want me to leave, I will understand. Leave. Griffin looked genuinely shocked. Why would I want you to leave? You just told me we are family. Do you really think I would turn away my own cousin, especially after everything you have been through? Relief flooded through Grace so powerfully she almost collapsed. Thank you so much. Though I have to say, Griffin continued, a hint of humor entering his voice, this makes things somewhat complicated. What do you mean? I mean that I have spent the last several weeks trying very hard not to fall in love with my housekeeper. Now you are telling me she is actually my cousin, which makes those feelings even more inappropriate. Grace's heart stuttered. You what? Griffin took her cold hands in his warm ones. I have been falling in love with you since the night I found you humming to my horses. Every day since then has only made it worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. I kept telling myself it was wrong, that I was your employer and any advance would be taking advantage. But now you are telling me we are cousins, which is either better or worse, and I honestly cannot decide which. Second cousins, Grace said faintly. We would be second cousins. Your father and my father were brothers, which makes us second cousins. Is that acceptable? I mean, legally and morally and all that. Grace felt laughter bubbling up despite everything. Yes, I believe second cousins can marry, though that is assuming quite a lot, considering you have not even kissed me yet. An oversight I would very much like to correct, Griffin said, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. They kissed in the barn while the storm raged outside, with the horses quiet and peaceful around them, and it felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. I suppose this means I need to find a new housekeeper, he said. "Why is that?" "Because I want to court you properly, Grace Jameson. I want to take you to church socials and town dances. I want to introduce you to everyone as my cousin first, let the community get to know you, and then eventually, if you are willing, I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life with you." Grace felt joy spreading through her like sunrise. "I would like that very much. Though I am happy to keep working around the ranch in the meantime. I enjoy the work and I like feeling useful." "Then we will figure it out together," Griffin said, kissing her again. They made their way back to the house through the storm, hand in hand, no longer fighting against the wind but moving through it together. Inside, they shed their snow-covered outer garments and returned to the parlor fire. This time, when they sat together, Griffin pulled Grace close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not felt since her parents died. "Tell me about Thomas," Griffin said. "Tell me about my uncle and what he was like." So Grace spoke about her father, about his love of the land and his skill with animals, about his quiet strength and gentle humor. Griffin shared his own memories of Robert, and together they wove a picture of two brothers who had loved each other despite the distance and time that had separated them. It felt like healing, like something broken was being mended. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. Griffin and Grace worked together to dig out from the snow, to repair the damage to the barn, to check on all the animals and make sure everyone had survived the night. The ranch hands who worked for Griffin arrived around midday, having waited for the roads to become passable, and Griffin introduced Grace to them properly. "This is Grace Jameson," he said, his hand resting lightly on her back. "She is my cousin, newly arrived from Kansas. She will be helping to manage the household." The men tipped their hats respectfully, and if they thought it was strange that Griffin's housekeeper turned out to be a previously unknown relative, they were polite enough not to say so. Wyoming was full of people with complicated histories, after all, and family connections could be surprising things. Over the following weeks, Griffin was true to his word. He courted Grace with an old-fashioned propriety that made her heart swell. He took her into town on Sunday mornings for church services, introduced her to the neighbors and shopkeepers, made sure everyone knew she was his cousin and under his protection. The townspeople of Rock Springs welcomed her warmly, grateful that Griffin Jameson had finally found some family after years of being alone. But it was in the quiet moments that Grace treasured most. The evenings they spent together in the parlor, talking about their days and their dreams. The times Griffin taught her to ride more confidently, his patience endless as she learned. The mornings they worked side by side in the kitchen, Griffin insisting on helping despite her protests. The nights they stood together by the horse corral, Grace humming her lullabies while Griffin's arm wrapped around her shoulders, watching the animals sleep peacefully. The horses had finally settled, their restlessness cured by Grace's consistent presence and care. Griffin's temperamental breeding stock were now calm and trainable, and several buyers from neighboring ranches had already expressed interest in purchasing foals come spring. It seemed Grace's gift with animals was becoming known throughout the region. As December arrived and the landscape turned into a winter wonderland, Griffin decided he could wait no longer. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, he got down on one knee in front of Grace. "I know we have only known each other for a few months," he said, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "But I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life. You brought peace to my horses, warmth to my home, and love to my heart. Grace Jameson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Grace felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Later, Griffin would tell her it had been his mother's ring, that his father had carried it with him all the way from Pennsylvania, that it represented love and commitment and hope for the future. They were married in late January of 1885, in the small church in Rock Springs with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Grace wore a dress that had been her mother's, carefully preserved and altered to fit. Griffin wore a new suit ordered specially from Denver, and he looked so handsome that Grace could barely breathe. Henry from the livery stable gave Grace away, tears streaming down his weathered face as he placed her hand in Griffin's. The ranch hands served as groomsmen, and the banker's wife, who had befriended Grace over the past months, stood as matron of honor. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by an entire community who had taken them both into its collective heart. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink, with music and dancing that lasted long into the night. Grace found herself whirled from partner to partner as various men claimed dances, but her eyes always found Griffin's across the room, and the love she saw reflected there made everything else fade into insignificance. When they finally retired to the house, alone at last, Griffin carried Grace over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He had spent the previous week moving his belongings into the master bedroom and preparing it for both of them, and the room glowed with candlelight when they entered. "I love you," Grace said, the words simple but weighted with everything she felt. "I love you too," Griffin replied, and then there were no more words, only the language of touch and breath and two hearts beating as one. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Griffin and Grace settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together seamlessly, each anticipating the other's needs, supporting each other through the challenges that ranch life inevitably brought. When a late January blizzard killed several head of cattle, they mourned the loss together and then worked to minimize the damage. When one of Griffin's prize mares gave birth to a healthy foal in February, they celebrated together, standing in the barn at midnight watching the newborn take its first shaky steps. By early spring, Grace had missed her monthly courses twice and began to suspect she was with child. She waited to be certain, seeing the doctor in town who confirmed her suspicions. When she told Griffin, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, his joy boundless. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Grace asked. "I do not care even a little bit, as long as you both come through healthy and safe, though I suppose a son would be helpful on the ranch eventually." "And a daughter would not," Griffin grinned. "If she is anything like her mother, she will probably run this place better than both of us combined." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace continued her work around the ranch, though Griffin became increasingly protective as her belly swelled. He hired a young woman from town to help with the heavier household tasks, insisting that Grace not overexert herself. She found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. As summer arrived, bringing warmth and long days, Grace spent her evenings in the garden she had planted, tending to the vegetables and herbs that would help feed them through the next winter. Griffin often joined her after the day's work was done, sitting on the ground beside her, talking about everything and nothing. "Have you thought about names?" he asked one evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been considering a few. If it is a boy, I thought perhaps we could name him after one of our fathers, Thomas or Robert." "I like that idea. What about for a girl?" "I thought maybe Sarah after my mother, Or perhaps Eleanor, which was your mother's name. Griffin reached over and placed his hand gently on Grace's swollen belly. Any of those names would be perfect, though I have to say, this child is already lucky beyond measure to have you as a mother. The baby arrived on a hot August night, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. The doctor from town had come to stay at the ranch for the final weeks of Grace's pregnancy, and he proved his worth as he guided her through the difficult process of bringing new life into the world. Griffin stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, offering encouragement even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. When the baby's first cry split the air, Griffin felt tears streaming down his face. The doctor held up a small, red, squalling infant and announced, "It is a boy." They named him Thomas Robert Jameson, honoring both of their fathers. He had Griffin's dark hair and Grace's delicate features, and from the moment he entered the world, he commanded all of their attention and love. The months that followed were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with powerful lungs and a willful temperament. Grace navigated new motherhood with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else, though she was grateful for the help from both Griffin and the young woman they had hired. Griffin was a devoted father from the start. He insisted on helping with nighttime feedings, pacing the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing lullabies in his deep, off-key voice that somehow always seemed to work. Watching him with their son, Grace fell in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to thrive. Griffin's horses were now well known throughout Wyoming for their good temperament and strong bloodlines, a reputation that brought steady income. The cattle operation remained solid, and with careful management and hard work, they were able to expand slowly but steadily. They hired additional hands to help with the workload, including a foreman who had worked on larger ranches and brought valuable experience. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt different, and she somehow knew she was carrying a girl. She was right. In the spring of 1887, little Sarah Eleanor Jameson made her entrance into the world, smaller and quieter than her brother had been, with her mother's brown eyes and a disposition that seemed peaceful from the start. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for long stretches, talking to her in his toddler babble, gently patting her hand when she fussed. Griffin and Grace watched their children together with hearts so full they sometimes ached with the joy of it. Did you ever imagine this? Grace asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard while Sarah slept in her cradle nearby. "When you found me in your horse corral that first night, did you ever think it would lead to this?" Griffin pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I knew there was something special about you from that very first moment. I just did not know how special, how completely you would transform my life. You brought me more than I ever dreamed possible. Family, love, children, happiness. You made this house a home, Grace." "We made it a home together," Grace corrected. "I was lost when I arrived here, broken and afraid. You gave me safety and kindness when I had no right to expect either. You loved me when I was still lying about who I was. You built this life with me, not for me." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The horses were quiet in their corral, thanks to the continued presence of the woman who had first calmed them with her humming. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. A coyote called from somewhere up in the hills, and another answered. "I wish our fathers could see this," Griffin said. "Thomas and Robert, I mean. I wish they could know that their children found each other, that the family they thought had been divided by distance was brought back together. "I think they do know," Grace said softly. "I think somehow they are watching and they are happy for us." As the years passed, the Jameson Ranch grew and prospered. Griffin's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread, and he became a respected figure in Rock Springs. Grace became known for her generosity and kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need, always willing to share what she had. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning the values of hard work and compassion that their parents exemplified. Thomas showed his father's aptitude for ranch work and his mother's gift with animals. By the time he was 6, he could ride as well as many adults and had started learning the complex skills required to manage livestock. Sarah proved to be quiet and thoughtful, with a love of books and learning that reminded Griffin of Grace. She would sit for hours listening to her mother read, absorbing stories and knowledge with a hunger that promised great things for her future. In 1890, a third child joined the family. Grace gave birth to another son, whom they named Henry after the kind livery stable manager who had first shown Grace compassion when she arrived in Rock Springs alone and desperate. Old Henry, who had become like an uncle to Thomas and Sarah, cried openly when he learned of the honor. Life was not without its challenges. There were harsh winters that tested them, droughts that required careful water management, market fluctuations that strained finances. But Grace and Griffin faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthened by every trial they overcame. The community of Rock Springs grew around them. New families arrived seeking opportunity in the West. Businesses opened and thrived. The railroad expanded its reach, bringing more commerce and connection to the wider world. Through it all, the Jameson Ranch remained a stable presence, a symbol of what hard work and love could build. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Griffin surprised Grace with a trip to Cheyenne. They left the children in the care of their foreman's wife and spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in a proper hotel and attending the theater. It was a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, but Griffin insisted. "You deserve to be spoiled," he said as they dressed for an evening out. "You have given me everything, Grace. The least I can do is give you a few days where you do not have to cook or clean or chase after children." They walked the streets of Cheyenne hand in hand, no longer young but still very much in love. They talked about their children and the future, about the ranch and their dreams for expanding it even further. They made love in their hotel room with a privacy and leisure that parenthood rarely allowed, reconnecting as lovers and partners. On the train ride home, Grace rested her head on Griffin's shoulder and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperate and alone to cherished and complete, from hiding her true identity to being celebrated for exactly who she was, from humming to restless horses in the dark to building a life of love and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Griffin asked, sensing her contemplative mood. "I was thinking about how strange life is, how one moment, one decision can change everything. If I had not stopped at Rock Springs, if I had gone on to another town, if you had not found me that night with your horses, everything would be different. But you did stop here, and I did find you, and everything is exactly as it should be," Griffin said firmly. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Grace. Our father's brotherhood brought us together even after death had separated them. That is not chance. That is destiny." Grace smiled, turning her face up for a kiss. "Then I am grateful for destiny, and for restless horses, and for a cowboy who said they sleep better for me." When they arrived home, their children rushed out to meet them, full of stories about everything that had happened during their parents' absence. Thomas had helped deliver a calf. Sarah had finished reading an entire book by herself. Young Henry had learned to count to 20. The house was full of noise and life and love, exactly as it should be. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed, Griffin and Grace stood together at the horse corral, just as they had done so many times before. Grace began to hum the old lullaby, and the horses, some of them the same ones that had been so restless that first night, immediately settled into peaceful sleep. "You know, I still do not understand how you do that," Griffin said, his arm around her waist. "It is not magic. It is just love and patience and consistency." "Then you have taught me well, because those are the principles we have built our whole life on." Grace leaned into him, feeling his warmth and strength, grateful beyond words for this man and the life they had created together. "Do you ever regret it? Taking in a strange woman who was trespassing on your property?" "Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Jameson. You and our children, this life we have built. It is more than I ever hoped for." They stood together as the stars wheeled overhead, as they had stood together through seasons and years, through joy and hardship, through the everyday moments that built a lifetime. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what could be achieved through hard work and devotion. In the years that followed, the Jameson family continued to grow and thrive. Thomas eventually married a woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built their own home on Jameson land, continuing the family legacy. Sarah surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Rock Springs and educating the children of the growing community. Young Henry showed signs of inheriting his mother's gift with horses, and talked constantly about breeding and training. Griffin and Grace grew older together gracefully, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They became grandparents, marveling at how quickly life moved, how the babies they had raised were now raising babies of their own. They took pride in knowing that the legacy they were leaving was not just land and livestock, but values and love, and the knowledge that family was the most important thing in life. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, Griffin and Grace sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They were both in their 50s now, their hair showing gray, their faces lined with the marks of hard work and much laughter. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over a quarter-century ago. "You remember that first night?" Griffin asked. "When I found you humming to my horses?" "I remember everything about that night. I was so frightened, so uncertain about the future. And then you appeared, and somehow I knew everything would be all right." "They still sleep better for you," Griffin said, nodding toward the corral where Grace's current favorite, a gentle mare named Daisy, stood peacefully in the fading light. "They sleep better because they are content, because they are well cared for and loved. Animals know when they are valued, when they are more than just property. Like I knew I was valued from the moment you chose to stay here with me." Grace reached over and took Griffin's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We chose each other. That night, in the barn during the storm, when I finally told you the truth about who I was, we chose to build this life together. Every day since then has been a reaffirmation of that choice." Their eldest grandson, also named Thomas, came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandpa, Grandma, come see what I can do. I taught myself to rope the fence post." Griffin and Grace exchanged amused glances, then followed their grandson into the yard. The evening stretched before them, full of family and laughter and the simple pleasures that had always defined their life together. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Grace began to hum. It was the same lullaby she had hummed that first night, the same melody that had calmed restless horses and frightened hearts, that had become the soundtrack of their entire life together. Griffin pulled her close, and they swayed together gently, dancing to music only they could hear. Around them, their grandchildren played, their children supervised, and the ranch they had built together stood solid and thriving. The horses in the corral settled for the night, their breathing deep and peaceful, and the world seemed exactly as it was meant to be. This was the legacy of that first night, when a desperate young woman had stopped to comfort frightened animals, and a lonely cowboy had recognized something precious when he saw it. This was what grew from courage and kindness, from honesty and love, from two people who had been brought together by family history and destiny, and had chosen to build something beautiful with the gift they had been given. Years continued to pass, as years always do, bringing changes both large and small. The ranch expanded further, incorporating new land and new opportunities. The community of Rock Springs grew into a proper town with paved streets and electric lights, though the Jameson Ranch retained its rustic charm. Griffin and Grace welcomed more grandchildren, each one a blessing, each one carrying forward the family legacy in their own unique way. But through all the changes, some things remained constant. Every evening, weather permitting, Grace would walk out to the horse corral and hum her lullaby. And every evening Griffin would join her, standing close, his arm around her shoulders, watching the horses settle into peaceful sleep. "They sleep better for you," he would say, the words now a beloved ritual, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. And Grace would smile and lean into him, grateful for every moment, every choice, every turn of fate that had brought them to this place. She had come to Wyoming searching for family and had found so much more. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. As they stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, with the mountains standing eternal in the distance and the stars beginning to emerge overhead, Grace thought about the strange and winding path that had led her here. She thought about her parents, about Griffin's parents, about the bonds of family that transcended death and distance. She thought about scared horses calmed by a gentle song, about a desperate young woman given a chance when she needed it most, about a lonely cowboy who had recognized love when it appeared in his horse corral in the middle of the night. Most of all, she thought about how lucky she was. To have found this man, to have built this life, to have been given the opportunity to turn fear into hope and loneliness into belonging. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Griffin replied, his voice steady and sure. "Always have, always will." And the horses slept peacefully, watched over by the woman who had first calmed them and the man who had given her a home, while all around them the ranch settled into night, secure in the knowledge that love had built it and love would sustain it for generations to come. This was their story, begun in darkness and desperation, grown through trust and devotion, culminating in a life rich with family and purpose and joy. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard work and harder winters, of cattle and horses and vast open spaces. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple, about two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build something lasting. The humming faded as the last horse settled into sleep, but its echo seemed to linger in the air, a promise and a blessing, a reminder that gentle kindness could tame wildness, that patient love could overcome any obstacle, that two lonely souls could find completion in each other. And so they stood together, Griffin and Grace Jameson, surrounded by everything they had built and everyone they loved, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply, and created something that would endure long after they were gone. The cowboy and the woman who had calmed his horses, whose love story had begun with a simple song in the darkness and had grown into something magnificent and enduring. This was home. This was family. This was love, and the horses slept better for them both.